Good morning. Good to see everybody this morning. Got some visitors and we got some folks home for Thanksgiving, so that's good. We are studying the book of Joshua. I'm going to do everything in my power today and next Sunday to finish up the book. And of course, the study of Hebrew history that we have begun is more than just the book of Joshua, but if we can finish that in the quarter, then we'll move into Judges for next quarter and try to make that a good breaking point, stopping point to pick up for the next quarter, because I know sometimes there are people who are in here this quarter that may be teaching next quarter, some that may be teaching this quarter that will be in next quarter. I show that we finished chapter 14. We were just finishing up with Caleb and his, saying that famous expression, "Give me this mountain." He wanted to have the promised inheritance. Of course, he was one of the faithful spies. Caleb and Joshua, the only two out of the 12 that were faithful to the Lord, and he's ready for God to give him this mountain. It's interesting, by the way, that Caleb doesn't ask for what's easy. He had said earlier that one of the things that the unfaithful spies said when they came back that kind of discouraged the heart of the people, was that we can't take the land. And what was one of the main reasons? Giants, Anakims in the land. They mentioned walled city, but also those Anakims, the giants in the land. Well, he had said earlier, when he was trying to get the people to follow God, he said, we are well able to overcome them. And now he's going to, as we sometimes say, he's going to put his money where his mouth is. And he says, I know we can conquer them. And now he's going to go and do just that. So he says, give me this mountain. So Joshua blesses him, of course, and gives him Hebron. Caleb is a great man of faith and courage, and it's a great study. Sometime maybe we look at Caleb, a character study of that great man of God. He's rewarded. He didn't give up on God's promises. Chapter 15 is going to discuss the inheritance of Judah. It's going to discuss the borders and so on. Caleb's particular part is in the south of Judah. Of course, he's from the tribe of Judah. Hebron is in Judah. By the way, verse, is it 8, I think, of chapter 15? Does anybody have anything different on the very end of verse 8? I was thinking it was the King James. I must be thinking of a different version. The valley of the... King James says Valley of the Giants. Anybody have anything different there? New King James or another version? What version is that? New King James. Okay, Rephaim or Rephaim or something like that. Yeah, that's the literal expression. I was thinking, I had it backwards. I was thinking the New King James had Valley of the Giants and King James had Rephaim.
Well, it has an asterisk down. It says literally giants.
Yeah, and it's just another, and that's what I was just going to point out. It's another term for giants, and you probably have a footnote or something there. Again, Caleb's particular part is in the south. He's going to drive out the sons of Anak. These would have been those giants that he said 45 years earlier, we are well able to overcome them. And again, now he makes good on that. Verses 15 through 17, Caleb is going to offer his daughter to the man who can take Kirjath Sefer. Of course, back in those days, they arranged marriages. Some places still do to this day. It's sort of interesting. We sometimes joke about it, Reagan and I, that with friends from camp and other places that we're not opposed to arranged marriages for our children. But it is ironic that even in places to this day where they arrange marriages, those are the lowest divorce rate just about of anyone. And so there's something to it. A lot of times as as young folks, we don't see the wisdom in our parents. The older you get, the smarter your parents get, you know. And sometimes when we're in those teen years, they're just morons, you know. But it's amazing how much intelligence they gain over just a short period of time. But you know, sometimes parents see something that perhaps we don't see, and especially in that, you know, oh, we're so in love. And so there a lot of times parents pick a great match. And you know, you and I both know that sometimes it has nothing to do with parents trying to find a great match, especially in like the Middle Ages. It had everything to do with political alliances. But nevertheless, sometimes arranged marriages may not necessarily be the worst idea. But anyway, he's arranging a marriage, and he's looking for a good son-in-law, for one thing. But he's also wanting someone who's on God's side. Not just anybody's going to marry my daughter, Caleb says. It's going to be someone who's a good man. He's on the Lord's side. He wants someone who's not afraid to fight on the Lord's side. He's not just looking for somebody who wants to go around picking fights, but someone who's not going to back down from a challenge to God's people. You think maybe Caleb remembered 45 years earlier all the cowards who kept saying, and the people who had zero faith, essentially, and kept, well, we can't conquer the land. There are giants there. There are walled cities. We can't do this. Caleb's, you know, essentially saying here, I'm not having a son-in-law who has that mentality. So he's looking for someone who's not afraid to fight on the Lord's side, to fight the good fight of faith. He also wants someone who's not afraid to fight against difficult odds. Again, probably remembering back 45 years earlier. Yeah, the odds were stacked against them. But it had nothing to do with odds and had everything to do with God. So Caleb is going to offer his daughter to the man who goes and takes Kirjath Sepher. Then, who ends up being the man? Othniel. Does that name ring a bell with anybody? He's also, or was also, a judge. In fact, the first judge. So we'll read about him again in the book of Judges. So Othniel takes Kirjath Sepher, marries Caleb's daughter, and becomes son-in-law to this great man of faith. The rest of this chapter, and of course, as you see, it's a lot of several verses there, but it's basically the cities of Judah's inheritance enumerated. We're not going to go and read all those verses, of course, but he's basically clustering them into 4 geographic areas. A lot of these we don't know where they were located, and it's interesting because verse 63, as for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the children of Judah could not drive them out, but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Judah at Jerusalem unto this day. There are a few things from this. You're going to see this pop up, and I'm not going to discuss it every single time, but I want to mention it here. You'll see this from time to time, sometimes in Judges, a couple times in Judges, a few times in the book of Joshua. The children of Israel could not drive out whomever. And, you know, sometimes skeptics latch on to that, and they say, well, there you go. These people are supposed to be, God is with them. Nobody can stand before them. God had promised them he was going to destroy all their enemies, and here they can't even drive out the Canaanites, or here the Jebusites, or other places that may be a different people. And number one, I'll refer you to the Apologetics Press website, because Eric Lyons has some great material on this. There's another specific reference, and I'm trying to remember exactly where that one is, but he has great material. There's a whole section of their website called Alleged Bible Discrepancies, and it's arguments people have made against the integrity of the Bible, and he answers those. So that's probably the best resource for this. But really, what it comes down to, it seems to be the best explanation, is that these are times when Israel's not following God's commands. Remember when they went to Ai the first time, and they were just utterly defeated. And it wasn't because God wasn't strong enough to help them. It wasn't because God lied to them and said, I'm going to be with you and I'm not. It was because there was sin in the camp. Well, what do you reckon might be the reason here why the Jebusites couldn't be driven out? There's probably something going on with the nation of Israel. Many times, even when they're conquering people, and we'll see this a little bit later on, many times when they're conquering people, they're not doing what God said. God said, drive them out. This is a judgment from God upon these people. But a lot of times sometimes they'll make alliances with them. Sometimes they leave them in the land. Sometimes they make them servants. But that wasn't God's instruction. So that's, best I can tell from my study, that's the most likely explanation. But again, Eric Lyons has some great material on the Apologetics Press website for that quibble that sometimes people will make against the Bible. The Jebusites were from where? Jerusalem, Jebus, Salem. And later on, it'll kind of become Jerusalem. So Jebus, Jebusites. They were inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the Jebusites dwell with the children of Judah at Jerusalem unto this day, he says. Again, that establishes kind of a time frame for the writing of the book of Joshua, for putting these events down on paper. And I realize they didn't use paper as we would say it, but just as a figure of speech. For putting these events down, recording these events, it was contemporary, pretty close at least, with when this happened, because when do the Jebusites not dwell at Jerusalem anymore? Does anybody remember that? This is going to happen under the reign of David. David will establish his capital at Jerusalem. 7 years at, somebody help me out there, is that Hebron? Is right, Hebron? I was going to say Hebron, I wasn't sure, I doubted myself. 7 years at Hebron, and then David, the rest of his reign will be at Jerusalem. Remember, the Jebusites kind of, I guess someone might call it, in modern day terms, trash talk or whatever. They're kind of antagonizing David. They say, you think you can take this hold? And David says, I'm going to take the hold. And of course, God was with him, and he went and drove out the Jebusites. But it took that long for Israel to do it because they left them there. And sometimes, and that can happen to us even to this day. God's not helping us in a miraculous sense, but in a providential way, sometimes we come to an obstacle that we could move, whether it be a figurative obstacle or whatever, but we don't take advantage of the resources God has given us. And so if Israel comes to these people and they say, oh boy, those Jebusites, they're tough, maybe we should just leave them alone. Well, of course God's not going to drive them out. He gave them instructions to go and drive them out. So that, again, there's a lot of different things that factor into that. And one of the things that I've said this before, but don't forget this. It is really easy for someone to throw out something and to say, oh, the Bible's full of contradictions. And they can just throw them out like this. I saw this in 2000, I think it was 2009, it may have been 2008, when Kyle Butt debated Dan Barker. Kyle Butt works with Apologetics Press. But they had this debate about, does God exist? And does the God of the Bible exist? And one of the things that Dan Barker did, he really, in one of his speeches, he got up and you could tell he was really kind of feeling like he had Kyle on this one, because they had about a 15-minute speech, may have been 10, and he just throws out, I bet there were 20 passages that he throws out. He says, well, the Bible's full of contradictions. One of the reasons I can't believe in the God of the Bible is because of things like, and he might throw out a passage like this. Well, and he'd put with it one of the passages in Deuteronomy where God says he's going to go before them and utterly drive out the people. Well, here they couldn't drive out the Jebusites. So you see, the God of the Bible, he either is not capable of driving them out, or he's so dishonest that he lied to them about it. So that's why I can't believe in the God of the Bible. And then he'd move on to another passage, and another, and another. And to answer each one of those, you can throw out a so-called contradiction or discrepancy in about 5 seconds many times. But to answer it, a lot of times it requires some mental sweat and effort, and you're going to have to do some research. And even for a person who's done that research to stand up and refute the so-called discrepancy, what took you 5 seconds to just say, oh, here's your discrepancy, may take them 5 minutes, or it may take 25 or 35 minutes to answer that discrepancy, to show, no, there's not a discrepancy there at all. And I really was frustrated in that debate when I saw that, because it showed a little bit of lack of integrity to me, because he knew Kyle didn't have time to get up and answer every single one of those. And so he just threw them out back to back in rapid succession. Kyle did handle it masterfully, because he got up and he said, he held up a book, and I believe it was the book that we have studied here before. It's called The Anvil Rings by Eric Lyons. And the whole book is dealing with alleged Bible discrepancies. There's a volume 1 and a volume 2 now. I can't remember. There may even be a volume 3 out now. But it's basically the material that, a lot of it's material on their website under that section of alleged Bible discrepancies. And Kyle held up the book. He said, "I will provide this free to anyone who wants it. All of these quibbles are answered in this book." I don't have time to give you all the answers to those passages, but I can assure you they're right here. And if anybody wants it, I'll make sure you get a copy. Interestingly, when the debate was over, they handed out every single copy of that book that they had. And I think they even took down some names and addresses to send more. So that was really neat, because that was held on the campus, I believe, of South Carolina, University of South Carolina. So just remember, it may take somebody 5 seconds to throw out a so-called contradiction, but it may take a lot longer than that to answer it. So be careful, because people will do that sometimes. They'll say, well, the Bible's full of contradictions. And, my question is always, okay, well, I don't want to follow a book that is filled with contradictions, so please do point them out to me. And well, here. And, sometimes it's something that I've looked at before, but sometimes it's not. Just bear in mind, it's not always as quick to answer as it is to just throw out the accusation. And that's true in any realm of life, right? I mean, people can make an accusation when a crime is committed. Here, this person committed that crime. And it may even appear on the surface, yeah, he did. But then you start doing the research and finding evidence, forensics and all that, and it may come out, well, there's no possible way that person committed that crime. Well, it's really easy to throw out the accusation, a lot more difficult to answer. So just bear that in mind. But David does drive out the Jebusites later on. So again, that kind of establishes a little bit of a time frame where we can figure out when the book was written, when these events were recorded. Chapters 16 and 17 are going to deal with the inheritance of Joseph's children, Ephraim and Manasseh. And remember, we talked about this. There's no tribe of Joseph. There's a double inheritance for Joseph. Levi will not have an inheritance in the land. They'll have those 48 Levitical cities. So Ephraim and Manasseh make tribes 11 and 12. 1 through 10 deals with, the whole chapter of 16 deals with the inheritance of Ephraim. Of course, Manasseh will be in chapter 17. I was looking for something in 16 in my notes here. Oh, verse 10. They drove not out the Canaanites that dwelt in Gezer, but the Canaanites dwell among the Ephraimites unto this day and serve under tribute. Well, see, here's an example where they didn't drive them out. They conquered them. They put them under tribute. But what did God say to do? He said, you drive them out utterly. So they put them under tribute. It's kind of a materialistic attitude. Well, we'll have them serve us. They'll be our servants. It's not what they were told to do. So, I have an expression, I don't know, I'm wanting to say this came from Brother Bland's class at Memphis, but it says, not being worse than those around you doesn't necessarily mean you're doing what God expects of you. Sometimes we look and we say, well, I'm not as bad as, but that's the wrong. What I need to be saying is, well, I want to grow more and more like my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Sometimes we have a tendency to look around us and say, well, I know I'm not perfect, but boy, look at old so-and-so. At least I'm not him, or at least I'm not her. But that's a mistake. Again, 17 is the inheritance of Manasseh. This would be the western half-tribe. Remember, Manasseh had a half-tribe. There are some special provisions in verses 3 through 6 for daughters whose father had died. If you look at, I'm trying to remember, Zelophehad. I couldn't remember the guy's name. There's Zelophehad's daughters. Mala, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. If you want to mess with somebody sometime, ask them who was Noah's husband. You get a lot of funny looks, but there are two Noahs in the Bible. One is male and one's female. I don't know if she was named after Noah. May very well have been. But that's one of his daughters' name. They come and they want to know about their inheritance because their father has died. So they appeal to Eleazar, Joshua, and the princes based on the earlier provisions from Moses in Numbers chapter 27 and also in chapter 36 of Numbers. So they're going to receive an inheritance in Manasseh, but there's a stipulation. What is the stipulation? Does anybody remember this? They marry how? Within their own tribe. That's the stipulation. You will receive an inheritance as long as you marry within the tribe of Manasseh. And again, Numbers 36, 1 through 3 iterates this for the first time. This is kind of a repeating of that. They would only inherit that which came through their father, but not through the son. Then the borders of Manasseh are described, again, that they do an incomplete job of driving out the Canaanites. They put them under tribute. It's a mistake. It's going to lead to idolatry. We'll see this in the book of Judges. In fact, Judges really, basically the book of Judges in large part is showing the repercussions of not following God's instructions, of driving out the inhabitants utterly. They're going to lead them off into idolatry. They're going to lead them off into apostasy. And then they're going to persecute them physically, literally. And you'll see judges rise up over and over again to deliver them as they turn back to God. 14 through 18 of chapter 17, you have a complaint of the children of Joseph. This is one of those where I don't know if I can say this with 100% certainty, but it seems here this is kind of a little bit of a prideful request or almost a demand. They're complaining because of the smallness of their lot. Now the land was divided by lots, which of course God's doing this. He's dividing the land. So you think God would have given them sufficient land? I would think so. He's not going to give them land that's too small for them. But there is other land. I don't know. I've seen this, different commentators and scholars and teachers teach it different ways. It may be that they just felt a little cramped, or I don't know. But it seems to me the best explanation is they seem to be a little bit prideful. They want more. And so Joshua says, basically, the land is there if you want it. And it almost seems like some sarcasm here from Joshua saying, if you're so great, go take it. Don't ask me. Get to work. And it may have been kind of a test for these people to see, are they going to go and take the land, or are they going to, sometimes we sit and, fuss about it. And this, when I was a child, especially my early teenage years, well, I say early, maybe more like 16, 17, once I was able to drive, sometimes I could sit around and fuss about what I wanted to do, and I didn't have the money, and Mom and Daddy wouldn't give me money, and I'd ask them for money. And at one point, finally, my dad and my mom both said, you know what, you want to do stuff, have at it, but go get a job and get some money. And then you can go and you can pay your own way to do stuff. Stop asking us for money. So it seems kind of like that's what Joshua's saying. You want the land, it's there. Go. Stop asking me for it and go take it. If you're so mighty and you're so capable, and of course they were as long as God was with them. I don't know. It just seems like a little bit of sarcasm there in verse 17 where he says, thou art a great people and hast great power. Thou shalt not have one lot only. But the mountain shall be thine, for it is wood, and thou shalt cut it down. The outgoings of it shall be thine, for thou shalt drive out the Canaanites, though they have iron chariots, and though they be strong. I don't know. It may not be sarcasm. It may be that he's just saying, you're a great people in the sense of being large. So you need more land. And I'll be honest with you, I've studied this passage numerous times, and I've kind of waffled on that myself. Sometimes I read it and I think, no, I don't think he's being sarcastic. I think he's just pointing out they're a large group of people, and hey, you need more land, so go take it. And then other times I read it, and like today, I'm kind of leaning toward it being some sarcasm. Tomorrow, I might feel differently about that. But this is one of those passages where it doesn't matter. It's not going to change the overall context. It's not a matter of salvation or anything, so it could go either way. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out because sometimes people get tripped up by that passage. Chapter 18. Chapters 18 and 19 are going to deal with the divisions of the land of the remaining 7 tribes, and also, of course, Joshua's inheritance. Verses 1 through 10 of chapter 18, they're going to move the tabernacle where? Where is the tabernacle set up? Somebody said it, I think. Shiloh. It's at Shiloh. And it will remain there for the next 300 years. Sometimes we just associate the Ark of the Covenant, the most holy place, the holy place, with, oh, that's Jerusalem. Well, that's the temple. And the temple will have a holy place and the most holy place and the Ark of the Covenant and all that. But before there was the temple, the permanent structure, there was the portable structure. They carried it all throughout the wilderness. You'll see in 1 Samuel 4, they'll actually lose the Ark of the Covenant. We'll cover that when we get there, but they get it back, thankfully. But before then, it was moved to Shiloh, and this is where you find that. There'll be a couple of references in the Old Testament later on where it'll mention something about Shiloh. A lot of times it's referring back to when the tabernacle was at Shiloh. Shiloh means what, by the way? Does anybody have a note in your Bible? It means peace. It's about 15 miles from Jerusalem. It's in Ephraim's territory. It's almost in the center of the land. So it was a reasonable place to move the tabernacle to. And of course, God is working toward a time when there will be a permanent structure. But it will remain there for about 300 years. There are 7 tribes left which had not received their inheritance. If you'll look at verse 3, Joshua kind of rebukes them. How long are you slack to go possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers had given you? He says you need to stop procrastinating, stop being negligent, and go take the land that God has given you. So he gives instructions for 3 men from each tribe to go examine the land, divided into 7 parts. They do as Joshua commands, and they return, of course, with the job completed. And Joshua cast lots for them before the Lord to divide the land. 11 through 28 deals with the inheritance of Benjamin. And then going on into chapter 19, you'll see the inheritance of Simeon, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, Dan, and the inheritance of Joshua. It's interesting, if you look at in chapter 19, verses 1 and verse 9, verse 1 and verse 9, it's talking about Simeon, his inheritance. Judah had too large of inheritance. The children of Simeon had their inheritance within the inheritance of Judah. So their land falls within. They're surrounded by Judah. And that's interesting because if you may just want to make a note in your Bible or make a note in your notes. Genesis 49, 5 through 7. Jacob, before he dies, he prophesies that Simeon and Levi would be scattered in Israel. Because they slew a man in anger. That's recorded in Genesis 34. And without getting into all that, I'm tempted to go and because that's a interesting account of what happened there with that whole situation. But they slew a man in anger, so he says they'll be scattered. Well, Simeon has an inheritance, but it's within Judah. They're surrounded by Judah, so they're kind of scattered in that sense. Levi has no inheritance. The Lord is their inheritance. Remember, he says that. And they'll have these 48 Levitical cities that are scattered throughout the land of Palestine. So, with Simeon's inheritance within the inheritance of Judah, Levi scattered among the tribes. Jacob's words are fulfilled. That's just kind of an interesting side note there. That was all the way back with Jacob still there in Egypt before they had even become persecuted by the Egyptians. So it goes through those inheritances. 49 through 51 is Joshua's inheritance, Timnath Serah. His inheritance is not chosen first, interestingly. When is Joshua's inheritance? It's basically last. I mean, it's going to detail the Levitical cities a little bit later, but essentially his is last. It's after the rest of the land is given. The public good was placed before his private interests. And that's, a true leader, he's looking out for the people that he leads. And that, people sometimes misunderstand what it means to be a leader. Sometimes people think, well, if I'm the leader, I'm going to get first dibs. And that's part of being a leader. Well, it is to some folks, but that's not real leadership. Servant leadership is going to place the good of others before self. Joshua says, we'll get all you guys your land, then we'll worry about me. And that's a great, great testament to the character of Joshua. If you look at chapter 19, let me get the right verse here. I feel like I've got the wrong verse, but we'll see. I turned too many pages. No, the last sentence of the chapter. So they made an end of dividing the country. The division of the land is complete. God has given the land to Israel. And this will be said at least 2 more times in the book of Joshua. And listen, if the premillennial idea is right, that the Jews are, there's so much entailed in premillennialism that we just don't have time to cover it all. But one of the main cogs of that doctrine is the Jews are going to go back to Jerusalem, and when Jesus comes to establish his kingdom on earth, supposedly, that he's going to rule over the Jews there in Palestine, sitting on David's throne. And so, the obvious question becomes, well, hello, the Jews don't even believe in Jesus, so how's that going to work? And there are all these different theories on that, but one of the ones I hear the most is that the Jews are just going to kind of start migrating back to Jerusalem. They're scattered all over the world. They're going to migrate back to Jerusalem when the end time is near. And so anytime a large group of Jews will go back toward Jerusalem, people will start saying, oh, here we go. Armageddon is coming. They're going to migrate back to Jerusalem, and then there's just going to be like a mass conversion of Jews to Christianity. And Jesus is going to come. He's going to set up an earthly kingdom, and he's going to rule over them. And he's going to give them their land because they didn't get the promised land. That's Israel's land. And so that's people on and on about that. In fact, I've said it before, we've had, even to this day, a lot of times foreign policy sometimes is shaped by a false teaching called premillennialism. I'm not saying we should be at odds with Israel. I think they're, as far as politically, they seem to be a great nation to be an ally. But not because that land is theirs from God. God took that away in a very definitive way in AD 70. He showed that he had severed his relationship with fleshly Israel. God's Israel now is spiritual Israel. But nevertheless, this portion of the book of Joshua and all these statements that they made an end of dividing the land. God has given you the land. There's not one promise failed of all that the Lord promised to do for you. Statements like that, they cannot be true. They cannot be written by inspiration if premillennialism is right. And so the only logical conclusion is premillennialism is not right. And that's just one of many, many problems with that doctrine. So interesting, because like I said, something like that will be made, some statement like that will be made at least 2 or 3 more times in the book of Joshua. There's one verse we'll look at in chapter 23 where it's like 3 or 4 times in the same verse that Joshua points out that God had fulfilled his promise. He gave them the land. It was theirs. They didn't always do what they were supposed to with it, but he had given it to them. And of course later he's going to have to take it away because of their disobedience. Chapter 20 deals with the 6 cities of refuge. The Lord instructs Joshua to appoint these cities in accordance with his instruction to Moses. You also have if you don't have a cross-reference in your Bible, you may just want to mention Numbers 35 and Deuteronomy 19. Numbers 35, 1 through 29, and Deuteronomy 19, 1 through 13. He's going to detail the purpose of the cities in verses 3 through 6. Well, somebody give me in a nutshell, what's the purpose of a city of refuge? Refuge, right? I know, but beyond that.
Kill somebody accidentally, you can go there and avoid the blood avenger.
Yeah. Something could happen. We might call it, I don't know if manslaughter will be the equivalent today, but it's an accidental thing. Something happens, Jim kills me, there is an avenger of blood. It's usually a close relative. And it's the idea that, you got to go make this right. And, that goes all the way back to Genesis 9, coming off the ark. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God created he man. So, Jim wasn't trying to hurt me. It was an accident. So what do? Are you just out and you got to face the music? No, God says there's a difference between manslaughter and murder. And so you have these cities of refuge. The avenger of blood is not permitted access there. A fair trial will be provided. The perpetrator, if innocent, will be allowed to live in the city. And how long did you have to stay? till the death of the high priest. You could leave after the death of the high priest. And you had to stay there. If you left before that time, your blood's on your own hands. So, interesting thing with these cities of refuge. You'd have to stay there if it was determined. By the way, there was to be a fair trial. And if the elders of that city of refuge determine, looking at the evidence, going back to the illustration, if they determine, Jim, you were trying to hurt him, you were trying to kill him, then they're not going to say, oh, you just stay here, we'll protect you. They put that person out, and now you have to face the avenger of blood, and you're going to be punished for your crime. So this was for people who accidentally killed someone, not someone who's pretending that they accidentally killed someone or who just outright murders someone. There's a lot I want to say about the cities of refuge. There are 6 of these. Kedesh, that's in Galilee, that's within the tribe of Naphtali. There's Shechem, that's in Ephraim. Kirjath Arba, which is also referred to as Hebron, that's within Judah. There is Bezer in Reuben. Ramoth, sometimes will be called Ramoth Gilead. It's within the tribe of Gad. And then there's Golan, which is also referred to as Bashan, and it's within the tribe of Manasseh. And if you look at these on a map, if you ever find them on a map, you may be able to find it at the back of your Bible, find these cities on the map. How are they dispersed? I don't know, that may be too general a question, but if you look at the map, you'll see 3 on one side of Jordan, 3 on the other side of Jordan. And they're spaced out so that you're never too far from a city of refuge. They're accessible, right? There is a lot that I want to say about the cities of refuge right now, which I'm going to save because probably want to cover that in a sermon sometime. And for time's sake here, of course, we're about to be out of time. For time's sake, I'm going to have to bite my tongue because the cities of refuge are fascinating to study the typology. Basically, to give you the short version of it, what are they a type of? They are the shadow. What is the substance? The Lord's church. The Lord's church is the city of refuge. And you know, I'll give you another little spoiler here, which you may already know anyways, but how long did you stay in the city of refuge? Till the death of the high priest. Who's our high priest? When's he dying? You think we need to stay in the Lord's church, stay faithful to the Lord? There's a lesson there for us. So the cities of refuge, in fact, Kedesh, it means holy. The word means holy. And so God's people are to be holy. In fact, ecclesia, what we have as a church, is called out, right? Shechem, it means shoulder. So it's the idea of, a lot of times we talk about shouldering a burden. Support. Bear you one another's burdens. There's Kirjath Arba or Hebron. It means alliance. That'd be the idea of fellowship. Bezer means strong or fortress. The church is to be a fortress against evil. The pillar and ground of the truth. 1 Timothy 3 tells us. Ramoth Gilead means elevation or sometimes exaltation. And that's the conspicuousness of the church. What does Jesus say about a city that's set on a hill? It cannot be hid. You light a candle and you put it on a stick for all to see on a candlestick, it gives light. And then, of course, Golan means rejoicing. And that's talking about joy in Christ. But again, I'm going to cover more of that at some point during a sermon. So I knew I'd run out of time. So Lord willing, what we'll do next week is we'll pick up 21, 22, 23, and 24 and close out Joshua as we close out this quarter of our study. Next week it ends in November. Is that right, Jimmy? Okay, so yeah, we'll one way or another. There's actually a lot more than I realized there in 21 through 24, but we'll condense it if we have to, and we'll cover that so that we get to a good stopping point between quarters. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and attention.